Alrighty, hello everyone. Now let's get rolling because we don't have too much time. We've got a lot of density here, but look, hopefully you stay with me and we'll get to your lunch on time as well. We might bleed into a little bit. But Bitcoin Maximalism in one lesson. Now, before we get started, the Maximalism label isn't that important here. In the same way that Marxists have coined capitalism, the German historical school coined the Austrian school, and then Ethereum co-founder Vitalik Buterin popularized the term. Now, what he and others were referring to is the idea, and I quote, an environment of multiple competing cryptocurrencies is undesirable. That is wrong to launch yet another coin. And that is both righteous and inevitable that Bitcoin comes to dominate the cryptocurrency scene. Alternate titles include economic literacy in one lesson, why Bitcoin is best, and why Bitcoin only. Now, for those of you who've done the work, you would have recognized a reference to Henry Hazlitt's Canonical Economics in one lesson. Highly recommended. But what's the connection here? Almost every single pre-coiner, no-coiner, altcoiner, scam spammer, high time preference degenerate are all economically illiterate. And that's almost it's essentially what sets the Bitcoin maximalists apart, an understanding of sound economics, and it's almost a law of nature. Now, technically, there is nothing wrong with being ignorant. It's not an insult. That is, if you know it. For me, name a field of knowledge that isn't a priori, and I'm almost completely ignorant. And I'm sure there's certain other areas that we are all too. Now, the problem is economics is the most discussed but least studied field of human inquiry. In fact, people often build their opinions about economic ideas on a knowledge base so tiny it would seem bizarre in other areas. Almost everyone discussing and debating economic problems that carry profound economic implications for society, they feel that when they do that, they've obviously because it's grounded in human action. The reason why that is because grounded in human action, economics is universally relatable, and therefore every individual tends to feel they have some relevant personal experience and knowledge through which to interpret economic events. They don't, as you will see. So it's especially important for Bitcoiners to understand incentives and consequences of various actions. New Bitcoin improvement proposals, BIPs, occur all the time, and not understanding what money is, the problem it solves, and what Bitcoin was designed to be, and actually is, opens up a massive vulnerability to supporting terrible changes and/or allowing bug exploits to remain unfixed. So whether we like it or not, is the fact that economics concerns everyone and belongs to all is the main and proper study of every pleb. Now, how do you know if you understand economics? Well, if you did some economic subject at high school or university, chances are you don't. The number of conversations I've had with econ grads that think they do, and you ask, okay, well, what school of economic thought that you align with? Nothing but blank stares. They don't even understand it's essentially the Keynesians, Chicago school, Marxists versus the Austrian school. Now, some quick questions help prompt your own self-assessment. Do you know what the human action axiom is? Can you differentiate the Austrian school from all other schools of economic thought? Do you think the methodology of the natural sciences is equally applicable to the social sciences or to human action? What's the one difference between a bad economist and a good one? Now, if you're not sure, like part of this, that you'll be able to answer these questions. Now, a bit of an executive summary. I think most of our attention spans kind of shot these days. So I'm kind of doing a bit of Tarantino, starting with a conclusion, so you understand the relevancy. I'm going to unpack that as we go. So Bitcoin maximalism in one paragraph. Now, this is kind of many, but broken up. So in a free society, the market would produce money as all other goods and services. There would be no such thing as money in a world that was perfectly certain and predictable. But in a world with unpredictable contingencies, people come to value goods on account of their marketability or saleability, i.e. as a medium of exchange. And since a more easily and widely saleable good is preferable to a less easily and widely saleable good as a medium of exchange, there's an inevitable tendency for the market to for a single commodity to finally emerge that differs from all others in being the most easily and widely saleable commodity of all, that commodity is called money. As the most easily saleable good of all, it provides the owner with the best humanly possible protection against uncertainty, in that they can be employed for the instant satisfaction of the widest range of possible needs. And so, yeah, economic theory essentially has nothing to say about what that commodity will be to acquire that status of money. Historically, it happened to be gold, but the physical makeup of our world would have been, if it was different, or was become different from what it is now, some other commodity would happen to become or might become money, and then the market will decide. Now, this is Bitcoin Maximalism in one tweet, more or less. One money is better than many. The attributes that make for good money are well known. Superior attributes allow one money to compete others out on the margin, and Bitcoin has the best monetary properties humans ever have seen. So efforts to define Bitcoin maximalism in any other area that isn't economic completely miss the point. Some cultural stuff is relevant, but that comes post economic understanding. Now, Bitcoin in one slide. So this is kind of from an economic perspective, specifically kind of narrowing it down. It's an economic good. It's a rival good, which is a subtype of scarce good. It's a type of rival good known as a commodity, and a new type of commodity called a digital commodity. And then it's also a digital monetary commodity with unprecedented monetary characteristics. So what do we get? And we're in executive summary mode here, conclusions. Bitcoin is a rivalrous digital commodity on an open source monetary network. Now, agenda. We're going to cover off, so what is the problem, essentially? So problems with the status quo, trusted third parties. They can allow you to do things like fiduciary media and fiat. How do we know? So what the problems are and what are the solutions? What is the proper way to study man? What is praxeology? What is the most apt field of knowledge to understand? What is money? What is the solution? And then a bit of a summary wrap up. Now, what are the goals of today's presentation? If you're economically literate, it's to help you understand there's a nature of knowledge you're unaware of, and how it can help you better understand reality. For those already enlightened, hopefully helps you sharpen your mental tools and understanding of praxeology and economics. A warning, it is dense. Mises, but doing a service in the sense of Ludwig von Mises, one of the greatest minds of the 20th century, Human Action, it's 950 pages. Murray Rothbard's Man, Economy and State, 1,500 pages. So summarizing down to mid-paragraphs as simple ideas is often a challenge. We've only got 30 minutes, and there's obviously not enough time to do that justice. But as such, part of the goal is to help spark some ideas or some trailheads that you can kind of follow if your interest gets piqued. Often we'll kind of only present the conclusions, but yeah, there's obviously a more elaborate data and in terms of the resources section you can kind of check out. sli.o. If you put in 21 million into that, you'll love to do a Q&A at the end. I don't think we have time, so but I definitely want to address those questions, so please post those. Now, what is the problem? I don't think there's much point spending too much time elaborating on the current problems. You're all here because you realize there's something very wrong with the status quo. There's nothing justifiable about it. But what I want to highlight is the key problems. So monopoly. So the state is a territorial monopolist of ultimate decision-making over a given territory with the ability to tax, i.e. the embodiment of institutionalized aggression. Now, throughout history, the state has always demanded control of money. As we can see here, money is the nerve center of the economic system. If, therefore, the state is able to gain unquestioned control over the unit of all accounts, the state will then be in a position to dominate the entire economic system and the whole of society. So the solution is obviously separation of money and state into Bitcoin. And I think Henry David Thoreau has a great quote about Bitcoin maxis. I think that there are 1,000 hacking at the branches of evil to the one who is striking at the root. To list off some topics that are related, the impact it causes, we've also got monopoly, legal tender laws, central banking, fiat money, fiduciary media, which is essentially money substitutes that freely are accepted at face value, which consist in claims to payment on demand of specified sums of money that are in excess of their monetary reserves held for their redemption. So think fractional reserve banking, rehypothecation, that type of stuff. FTX, more or less, the result of that. Fiat money is something that is only possible that actually comes from commodity money first. pick any kind of currency, fiat currency that exists, you actually got to trace it back to commodity money. It can be. And then business cycles. So it's actually not just central banks that just create that, but fiduciary media. So even in free banking scenarios, there would be the business cycle because of if fiduciary media is allowed. So striking at the root here a little bit. So the root problem with conventional currency is all that trust that's required to make it work. A central bank must be trusted not to debase the currency, but the history of fiat currency is full of breaches of that trust. Banks must be trusted not to hold your money and transfer it electronically, but then they lend it out in ways of credit bubbles with barely a fraction on reserve. And we do have to trust with our privacy, trust in their privacy, trust them not to lend out identity thieves or drain our accounts. So what's the problem ultimately summarized as? It's trust of third parties. And so for the first time ever, humanity has a money that helps us solve this fundamental issue. So very much worth noting here. Would you digest that? Very much worth noting the correct definition of inflation is the increase in the money supply, not the consequences of that. So like a rise in prices. So for instance, on the right image, CPI, there's goods and services experiencing price drops, and we can, that are still impacted by inflation. So CPI, basket of goods that they manipulate, housing is not part of it. Like, don't get me started. But consider, for example, the cell phone services or mobile phone services dropped by 40%. And yet, for instance, if inflation was 10%, that's not deflation. If inflation was 10%, those prices could have dropped 50%. So you're still being robbed in that sense. So don't look at the prices as a consequence. Increasing the money supply is essentially the issue. So a little bit deeper now. So how do we know? How do we know about the outer world or reality, for that matter? Where does our knowledge about it come from? And so the attempt to answer these questions leads to epistemology, the branch in philosophy dealing with the origin, scope, and validity of human knowledge. So in the epistemological debate, there are two archetypal and actually diametrically opposed concepts. So you've got empiricism and rationalism. Empiricism claims that sensory experience or observation is essentially man's or humanity's main or even sole source of knowledge, while rationalism claims that this knowledge stems from human reason. Hardly anyone would deny that there's knowledge that comes from our sensory experience. Obviously, take for example the knowledge that water freezes 0 degrees. There's some atmospheric things that do change that, but it actually takes observation to acquire that knowledge. However, in the field of science, which formulates knowledge that applies universally, irrespective of time and place, rationalism holds that empirical knowledge gained through sensory experience doesn't have the same validity as knowledge deduced from reasoning. A quick philosophical note, a priori denotes a proposition or declarative statement expressing knowledge that is acquired prior to or independently from experience, and in contrast with a posteriori, which denotes knowledge that is acquired through and on the basis of experience. So Mises took the idea of a synthetic a priori, the idea that there are true statements about reality derived from axioms and logic that don't need to be tested from Immanuel Kant. But Mises added an extremely important insight to the Kantian kind of mental categories, which can be understood ultimately as grounded in the categories of action. So with this, Mises bridged the gulf in Kantianism that separates the mental from the physical. So what we think about the outside world to the physical world. Because if you start from the concept of action, you immediately realize that action involves a subject and an object. So action means I do something with something in order to reach certain goals. That implies a theory of causality, which has essentially been a sticking point in Kantianism and remains so in empiricism. So there are hints of this in Kant, but nothing explicit as you find in Mises. So only experience makes it possible for us to know the particular conditions of action in their concrete form. However, what we know about action under given conditions is derived not from experience but from reason. And so what we know about the fundamental categories of human action, economizing, preferring, the relationship of means and ends, and everything else that together with these constitutes the system of human action is not derived from experience. We conceive all of that from within, just like logical and mathematical proofs, so a priori, without any reference to experience. Now, science means scientia, or correct knowledge. It's older than and older and wiser than the empiricist attempt to monopolize the term. Uh, there's nothing wrong with the scientific method when applied to the natural sciences and the physical sciences. Scientism, on the other hand, is the profoundly unscientific attempt to transfer uncritically the methodology of the physical sciences to the study of human action. So stones, molecules, planets cannot choose their courses of like their behavior is strictly and mechanically determined for them. Only humans possess free will and consciousness, for they can then indeed must choose their course of action. So to ignore this primordial fact then about the nature of man, his free will that exists, is to misconstrue the facts of reality and therefore be profoundly and radically unscientific. Because if men are like stones, and if they're not purposeful beings and do not strive for ends, then there is no economics, there's no psychology, there's no ethics, there's no technology, and there's no science of man whatsoever. So summarized, what's this divide called? It's called methodological dualism. One example that Mises likes to give previously in his classes was there's two obviously fundamental ways of approaching human behavior by looking at central station and essentially the behavior through rush hour. So like the objective or truly scientific behaviorist, he pointed out, would observe the empirical events, so people rushing back and forth aimlessly at certain predictable times of day, but that's all he would know. But the student of human action would start from the fact that all human behavior is purposeful. He would then see the purpose is to get from home, get to work, and vice versa, and the opposite at night. And so it's obvious who would discover and know more about human behavior, and therefore who would be the genuine scientists. So to use an analogy, it's as if one wanted to establish the theorem of Pythagoras by actually measuring the sides and angles of the triangles. So mustn't we say that someone who's trying to do that, who thinks about economic propositions, would actually have to be empirically tested, is a sign of outright intellectual confusion, I guess. So this is the difference which distinguishes the Austrians, or more precisely Misesians, from every other current economic school of thought. And Mises' answer is that economics is a science of human action, and essentially a priori science whose propositions can be given rigorous logical justification. And all other schools of thought conceive of economics as an empirical science, just like physics, which develops hypotheses and requires modeling and continual empirical testing. Now, to ram home this point about methodological dualism, which all the EIs, emotionally intelligent, and then economically illiterate, reject, is that essentially a human being considered as an acting person is a subject and not any kind of physical object. An acting person is not just a body, not like an empirical object like a kidney or a stone or a kidney stone. It's a subject as contrasted with a physical object is not measurable or claimable as property at all. As a subject, like myself, the concept of a self, it's intangible like an idea, and ideas are not scarce objects and therefore cannot be properly owned. The acting person has a physically observable aspect, but is not reducible to physical substance. We are subjects and objects by nature. We literally embody methodological dualism. Now, what is the most apt field of knowledge to understand Bitcoin? Bitcoin was designed to be money. Now, what field obviously covers that? Praxeology, the logic and science of human action, and specifically the best developed branch, economics. Now, no one's claiming it's the sole realm, just the most apt one. Now, why is it the most apt? I think because it's money, being the most common medium of exchange and most salable good in society. It's a result of human action. We've seen that requires a completely different methodological approach to the natural sciences. Now, naturally, there's a litany of fields of knowledge and advancements that can also need to be understood to grok Bitcoin. Understanding economics alone doesn't immediately get one to understand Bitcoin without having done the proof of work in understanding what it is comprised of in other areas. All are important to understand Bitcoin, and you obviously need to work with cryptography, coding. But without that economic understanding element, Wiz hit on it on the main stage before. That special source of understanding that is essentially what gives that Bitcoin value. So you can kind of isolate all this other stuff. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't being money. And essentially, yeah, that's sound money properties. So understanding that, protecting those sound money properties is important, and there's nothing ultimately keeping it from losing the certain qualities of money if we don't keep that insured. Now, what is praxeology?
Tim wakes up on a Monday morning. He needs to get to work. Getting to work is his end. We can derive knowledge from Tim's action through several sciences. Why Tim wants to get to work, psychology. Is going to work a right end for Tim, ethics. What tools or means must Tim employ to make it to work, technology. The study of the fact that Tim wants to get to work and has wanted to in the past, history. There is a science not generally known yet. The logical implications that men, Tim just being one of them, use means to attain chosen ends. Praxeology. Praxeology is a science that builds on the concept of action. Action has many implications. Ends, means, time, value, cost, need, uncertainty, causality, marginal utility, prediction, production, return, exchange, capital, rationality, good, probability, time preference, scales of value, interest rate, labor, calculation, pricing, competition, money, market, wages, taxes, credit, business cycle, inflation, deflation, understanding.
So thank you to Prax Girl there. Awesome series on YouTube, so definitely check it out. Now, Misa said that was the only true science since ancient times. So everything else has had some precedent, even in the ancient world. But this is a totally new field of knowledge, and people don't know how to, what to make of it, or even how to mentally recognize what it is. So it cannot be overemphasized what a radical development it is to say that there is definite knowledge about humanity that is not part of ethical or ought sciences, and is also not merely contingent or conventional in nature. It's like the natural physical sciences. People just can't wrap their heads around it this easily because they intuitively assume their free choice automatically removes all structural constrictions, which it doesn't. So the axiomatic method, not going to necessarily go through all this, but in a snapshot, it's essentially we begin with the primary axioms. We know that men, humanity's causal agents, and that these ideas were adopted by free will through their actions. We therefore begin by knowing the abstract axioms, and we can then build upon them by logical deduction, introducing a few other subsidiary axioms to limit the range of scope to the concrete applications we care about. And the proper theoretical methodology in human affairs is then this method, the axiomatic deductive method. The laws deduced from this method are more, not less firmly grounded than the laws of physics. For since the ultimate causes are known directly as true, these consequences are also true. Here's a helpful diagram to kind of summarize using a simple tree metaphor. So the root of praxeology can be derived using the analysis of actions of isolated individual, and the concept of action its first implications, got that down the bottom. The trunk comprises the analysis of interaction with classes of communication, communicative acts, so embroidering, claiming, consenting, and accounts in the essentially built on first appropriation principle and the possibility of consensual transfer of property titles. These concepts are logically prior to that branching that you see. So you've got economic theory on the left and legal theory on the right, because both those branches logically presuppose some account of the root and trunk foundations, even if that's unacknowledged. And then the transition from branching may be identified with the move from universal features of all action or interaction to axiomatic deductions that are more or less narrowly specified with increasing factual or contextual assumptions that assure the relevance of the analysis to what's being under consideration. So then you get to the complex issues, which hopefully have both at the top. Now, praxeology is based. It's descriptive, not prescriptive. Some other methodological concepts come into play. So methodological individualism, that praxeology deals with the actions of individual men. Methodological singulism, so it's value-free. So the content is not important, it's the logical structure. and yeah, we can kind of, I think, point out here that the legal theory and economics is whether, yeah, definitely whether it's is based, and it essentially informs the ethics or ought. Now, yeah, like, okay, look at thymology here. That section, what is thymology? So no particular relation to praxeology and economics. It's kind of the psychological component. So it's why the very act of valuing is a thymological phenomenon. So it doesn't care about why man chooses. It's just the fact that he does. So why one person chooses water and another wine, it's a psychological problem that is no concern for praxeology or economics. And then we kind of get to the top section, so the ought or ethics. So understanding what rights are or legal is different than deciding how, whether, and in what ways to actually respect them or not in action. So ethics. And notice the economic theory, legal theory, or essentially libertarianism in there, aren't ought, but is based and inform economics. Summaries here, you can deny economics, but you can't defy economics. So economics, as it emerges, is a series of praxeological laws which are eternally part of human nature, of human action. Praxeological law, like physical laws, are always with us and are disregarded by human beings only to their own peril. Men have learned that they cannot afford to ignore the law of gravitation, but they persist in ignoring the praxeological law of economics. Not going to read all this, don't worry, but I'll be essentially the slides will be available and you can kind of dive in further. But this is really just a procedure of praxeology. It kind of felt important to include that, and really it's an understanding of the categories of action. 1, 2, a description of the world which these categories of action assume concrete meaning. And then 3, a logical deduction of those consequences which result from that performance of some specific actions within that world. So it's like if X and Y remains unchanged, then Z will result. You kind of got the formula, and then in the empirical world, the real world, it's then, okay, does this apply or not? Now, provided there's no flaw in that process of deduction, the conclusions that essentially yielded must be valid a priori, because their validity is ultimately traced back to the indisputable action of human action. Obviously, if that situation changes, we're assuming a fictional world like Robinson Crusoe on an island or whatever it is. It's only true in that possible world. If, on the other hand, you have a situation and changes can be identified as real, perceived or conceptualized as such by real actors, then those conclusions are a priori true about the world that is as it is. And that's essentially the idea of economics as praxeology. Another one I won't be reading all of, but there's essentially economic examples of economic propositions. This can help, understanding why requiring to be test these things is absurd. One example is that whenever a quantity of money is increased, while the demand for money to be held as a cash reserve on hand is unchanged, the purchasing power of money will fall. If X, Y remains unchanged, then Z will result. Now, human action is actors' purposeful pursuit of valued ends with scarce means. No one can purposely not act. Every action is aimed at improving the actor's subjective well-being above and what it otherwise would have been. And essentially, an axiom is an unchallengeable and self-evident, since the critic who attempts to refute it finds that he must use it in the process of the alleged refutation. So, the attempt to disprove the action axiom, good luck, would itself be an action aimed at a goal, requiring means, excluding other courses of action, incurring costs, subjecting the actor to the possibility of achieving or not achieving their desired goal, and so leading to a profit or loss. And the very possession of such knowledge then can never be disputed, and the validity of these concepts can never be falsified by any contingent experience, for disputing or falsifying anything would already have presupposed by their very existence. So as a matter of fact, a situation in which these categories of action would cease to have any real existence could itself never be observed, for making an action too is an action. So praxeology, just like Bitcoin, is just like Bitcoin in the sense that you don't need to trust. You can logically verify. Empiricism essentially requires that you trust and are never apodictically certain. So essentially, this is a great quote here, that those that don't, if you've got an issue with the arguments or economics the Austrians put forward, trace it back and point out where it is wrong. And those that don't bother to do this, essentially the same as the astronomers of the 17th century who refused to look through the telescope that would have shown them Galileo was right and they were wrong. If anything's above before has been confusing or too dense, I sincerely request you listen to Seyfriedin and myself stand on the shoulders of intellectual giants and kind of convey how we can get a better understanding of reality through this incredible lens. Failing that, the book on the left-hand side just here, Economic Science, the Austrian Method, 85 pages, free on Mises.org, mises.org. Yeah, if not a good place to start. We've done a little bit of like economics in one lesson, a few other introductory talks, resources, but yeah, I'd almost say you wouldn't be an Austrian if you've not read that. Now, what is money? Simplified as could be. So why do we trade? Since this is since time is always scarce and is advantageous if I specialize in those things that I'm particularly good at and you specialize in those things which you're particularly good at, and then the total quantity of goods produced in this way would be higher than it would be if we both had decided to produce those things on our own. So what is the alternative? If you imagine that what would happen to us if you decide tomorrow that we stop engaging in division of labor, and then basically all of mankind, you have to become self-sufficient producers, then basically all of mankind would die within a few weeks, because as soon as we run out of our beer in the fridge or in the refrigerator, or you wouldn't be able to make new beer, as soon as our suit wears out, you would not be able to produce a new one. It would take that 10,000 years to do, and so on. And that's you being self-sufficient, not engaging in division of labor, obviously. What are the limits of barter? We can only trade and barter if a double coincident of once exists. That is to say, if you have what I want and I have what you want, what's the solution? Well, what can I do then in a situation where I'm stuck and I cannot directly trade with anyone? Then I can just simply look out for individuals who have the goods that have a high degree of marketability than the good that I want of the goods that then I want to sell. And money essentially then is a common medium of exchange. That's essentially the definition. And the characteristic of that medium of exchange would be the most saleable goods and most widely accepted of all goods. Now, the importance of dualism continues. So looking at Bitcoin from a unit perspective and a system perspective. Monetary properties, so Bitcoin, the rival is digital quantity of the asset, so recognizability, durability, portability, divisibility, fungibility, and hoardability or storability, and then heavy demand. Won't necessarily call out, but it's just interesting to note that divisibility gold actually became more useful as a money only after its advances in metallurgy, which made divisibility easier. And these advancements led to an increase in the quality of gold coins and a higher purchasing power. So the purpose of the open source monetary network is to help send, receive, and store the rivalrous digital commodity. Historically, the monetary properties of money have been more in your face, given the tangibility. However, the Bitcoin being digital, the open source monetary network is much more in your face, and the monetary properties are more hidden. So the existence of the network enables the existence of security and the value of the units. Now, overview typology of money. So I updated this from Guido Holzmann's kind of correction of the incorrectly translated version of Mises' Theory of Money and Credit. So this is probably called Theory of Money and Fiduciary Media. You might see this in Seyfriedin's Principles of Economics. Won't have time to define these, but one call out is Lightning is acting as a perfect money substitute for Bitcoin. So the market treats it as one-to-one. It does not for Liquid, because it reintroduces trust. No matter how minimized that might be, it's a difference in kind, not degree. Yeah, so what's the value of a telephone if it's not connected to the telephone network? So essentially looking at it in isolation results in inept commentary such as no intrinsic value. Not understanding intrinsic properties versus value is a profound error. And essentially what folks like Schiff are trying to articulate is, if we're being generous about it, is trying to cover there's no objective use value that he thinks. And therefore implicitly referring to Mises' regression theorem, that they're still wrong, but they can't really formulate his objections correctly. As per Mises, so currency is anything which passes from one person to a commonly acceptable medium of exchange, and then money is the most commonly used. So cigarettes can be used as currency in prison, but then they're not money, are the most common in society. Gold used to be money. So for most Bitcoin is already money, and for the maximalist perspective, accept that it in having the best monetary properties will eventually further improve and become money for others. Now, I'm not going to dive into this too much. So covering the Bitcoin money question, Mises' regression theorem, and the Bitcoin regression timeline, Conrad Graf posits that Bitcoin may therefore be the best documented historical illustration of the origins aspect of the regression theorem. Now, what is Bitcoin backed by? Now, all money in the proper sense is backed by something. Bitcoin does it in a new way that is far superior, which is distributed cryptographic confirmation of the Bitcoin time chain. I'm going to skip through a few slides because I know we're already over. Nailing on this, so the notion of competition between monies is essentially contradiction in itself. Strictly speaking, a monetary system with rival monies or freely fluctuating exchange rates is still a system of partial barter and riddled with the problem of requiring double coincidence of wants in order for some of the exchanges to take place. So competitive monies are not the outcome of free market actions. But yeah, we're going to go back into that. What is Bitcoin? You're referring to the white paper. It's not file storage. I'll save that rant for later. Satoshi essentially, like until now, like it's a scarce commodity as well, and agreeing with that. And that's the one takeaway. So one important truth about money is essentially it's a commodity. It's not an abstract unit of account. It's not divorceable for a concrete good. It's not a useless token only good for exchanging. It's not a claim in society. It's not a guarantee for a fixed price level. It's simply a commodity. If you want to know about more clearing up some misconceptions, definitely what Bitcoin is not, then Lavera's podcast is there. Summarizing, it's the foundations, the axiomatic deductive foundations, what constitutes the best monetary properties, and that the market tends towards one mode of exchange. So Bitcoin Maxis, it's the economic understanding of our prior knowledge, that praxeology that essentially gives us that foundation. Altcoin is an attempt to act as if they push our alternatives and act as if 1 + 1 = 3, and the Maxis are really just going, well, it's 2. 1 + 1 is 2, and get called toxic as a result. Are we toxic? No, we're passionately principled. Part of that is just being so sure as acceptance of reality. Resources, wrapping up here. You've got a whole bunch here. Call to action, Mises Institute, free books, pretty audio books. Read anything and everything by Conrad Graf and the Satoshi Nakamoto Institute. Can find some of my things up there on the screen. Talked about BISC last year here. Non-KYC stacking sats, do that. No time for this. But yeah, I'll play you out with some.